watched the stars for a sign mandating the deposition of the kings pending a ruling from Delphi or Olympia. Cleomenes, like Agis, was motivated by military necessity. The outbreak of war with the Achaean League in 229-8 made the expansion and improvement of the Spartan army especially urgent, and the mass liberation of Helots in 223-2 answered a military and financial emergency. The actual or supposed reforms of Lycurgus had brought Sparta step by step to supremacy in the Peloponnese, and Cleomenes' revolution brought immediate success in its train, with a string of military and/or diplomatic victories before the reverse at Argos. But the broadened scope and scale of conflict in the Hellenistic period was a far cry from archaic interpolis warfare, and the revolutionary method and content of Cleomenes' reforms only hardened the resolve of Sparta's enemies. The gravest charge that Aratus leveled against Cleomenes, Plutarch tells us, was his elimination of wealth and rectification of poverty. Cleomenes surely did not intend to export his reforms, as doing so might increase the strength of his rivals, but his opponents clearly could not count on this. After all, Cleomenes openly aspired to recover the Spartan hegemony that had been lost at Leuctra in 371, and his reforms inspired demands for similar measures elsewhere. In 235, the cities of the Achaean League threatened to revolt for reasons including the demands of the poor for redistribution of land and cancellation of debts. 2 years later, the discontent of the Argive masses, who had hoped in vain for Cleomenes to cancel debts at Argos, was a major factor in his loss of the city. These measures had long defined political revolution in the Greek world. Solon Seisachthia inaugurated a thorough revision of the constitution and laws of Athens. The treaty between Sparta and Tegea that ended the Second Tegeate War prohibited Tegea from enfranchising fugitive Messenians. The Charter of the League of Corinth prohibited the overthrow of member cities' constitutions, unlawful executions and banishments, redistribution of land, cancellation of debt, and liberation of slaves for the purpose of revolution. The combination of the substance of Cleomenes' reforms with his assumption of supreme power by summarily exiling opponents, eliminating the Ephyret and the Eurypontid kingship, and curtailing the power of the Gerousia, marked Cleomenes as not just a revolutionary, but a tyrant. The hallmarks of tyranny included the acquisition of power by force, alteration and violation of ancestral laws and customs, transgression of the traditional powers of kingship, demagoguery, cancellation of debts, redistribution of land, expansion of the franchise, and liberation of slaves. The enemies of Cleomenes thus had good reason to label him a tyrant, and the tyrannical nature of his reign was itself revolutionary. For in its past days of glory, Sparta had resolutely opposed tyranny. The Spartans never had a tyrant of their own, and they even deposed tyrants in the Peloponnese and beyond, including Aeschines of Sicyon and Hippias of Athens. Cleomenes, ironically, met the same fate at the hands of the victors of Sellasia, suffering de facto deposition as a result of his flight to Egypt. Yet some of his reforms survived his fall. After Sellasia, Antigonus took control of Sparta and restored its ancestral constitution and laws. Exactly what this means is debated. It certainly involved the restoration of the Ephyret, but not the kingship. The Gerousia must have recovered at least some of the powers Cleomenes had taken from it. On the other hand, the patronomoi and the agoge remained in existence, and the continuation of the agoge may indicate that Cleomenes' debt and land measures remained in effect as well. But the enormous casualties of Sellasia, only 200 out of 6,000 Spartan troops survived, resulted in a crisis of oliganthropia similar in scale, though differing in cause, to that which had motivated Agis and Cleomenes in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Είμαστε εντός του χρόνου. Τώρα είναι η σειρά του δόκτωρα Χρήστου Μπαλόγλου. Now it's the turn for Mr. Baloglu and he may continue. We are in time. Mr. Priest of Sparta, Mr. Congressman, Mr. Presidents of the institutions, I would like to congratulate the institution of Spartee and the Cultural Association of Sparta for the organization of this conference about the Battle of Sellasia, which was a landmark not only for Sparta and the Peloponnese, but also for the Hellenistic period in general. The Battle of Sellasia presents something for the first time. It is the first battle between states where foreign soldiers take part, such as the Galads or Macedonians. And I would like to thank the scientific committee who took part of my who organized my participation, and specifically Ms. Kanelopoulou for her invitation. The reform program of Cleomenes III that was not completed by Agis IV is the element and the subject of research in the past, in the last decade, in the Academy of Athens 2008 from Michalopoulos Miltiadis, which was published and had many assessments. And was one work that was worth to mention. In a place in the Eastern Mediterranean, it is very important to talk about it, about what happened there in the Hellenistic area. Agis at the beginning and Cleomenes later act based on tradition of Lycurgus and could be even more built up. These two kings and what their actions can be characterized from the two philosophical schools, the Stoa and the Academy. And also it is important to mention the problems that happened there. Agis and Cleomenes act by denying the institution of polis that came from Diogenes the Pontian, who was the representative of cynicism, and it was characterized by combining the Greeks and the Persians. We should point out that when historians admit that Greece was a center of life for people, we talk about two things. Firstly, that we positively express ourselves about the political regime of Sparta, and secondly, we congratulate democracy. And 268 up to 64, we talk about that it is very well known the relationships of Megalopolis and Academia. And when they collaborated, they went to Apotaphea. from this point of view, it is interesting what happened in Stoa and Cleomenes because it is connected with him. At the same time, the opinions in the academy that were brought to life in Megalopoli were very important about what would happen to the reform program of Cleomenes and are opposite to what happened in Stoa. In order to have a great polis, one opinion that was common in the antiquity during the Hellenistic era, in Messinio and the Roman times by Polybius, Megalopolitis, and Cicero, and honored the very courageous lawmaker and what he would express in his philosophy, and that's why they turned to Sparta. The institutions in Stoa and the interest in Sparta are very old, as it is as we can see from Xenon, friend of Kytieos and student of Elitu, who were consulted by leaders. He went to Sparta, and with the power of Stoicism, he were quickly the young man leader of the Lacedaemonians. And his mission was not to be the critical, to ask criticism against Lycurgus, but to be a new one who would be an example of a new community. And let's not forget that Platon was the one who... The speaker talks now in ancient Greek. Lycurgus was not the first lawmaker, but the person who educated Sparta, and in the face of Cleomenes, he saw the young, intelligent, and courageous man and leader, as we can see in Plato's works, who could reform the city. Cleomenes, who was socially distant, and we can see that in many works, and by opposing the opinions from Max Weber about the first social distant people, made a change in the political regime of Sparta, and the political regime of Sparta made kings to be under the control of ephori, the 5 ephori, who every year was elected by the appella and the assembly. This mixed political regime made sure that the political situation would be stable in Sparta, and that changed by Cleomenes, who was the lone king. The advisor, Pharon, tries with his works to bring back the tradition of political situation by Lycurgus, who was an which was in Lycurgus' Vios, the work described as something that could not be forgotten. In order to make Sparta equal to everybody, the measure to distribute land would make citizens equals. People could not understand the idea of everybody owning the same estate, but that was part of the ideas of equality. And the works of Spheros were used to understand the situation back then. The results of the reforms of Cleomenes could be seen in Megalopoli, in the supporters of academia, and to those who supported cynicism. Based on the works of Pausanias, Megalopolis is the biggest city, not only in Arcadia, but in Greece in general, which was built with the most enthusiasm and collected the hopes of all Greeks. Arkesilaos, who came from a rich family in Asia, had relationships with the Macedonians and Pergamos as well. Megalophanes and Eknathmos, who were followers of Agesilaos' philosophy, brought democracy to the town. These two philosophers of Megalopoli went to Argos, fled to Argos, as Pausanias has said. Megalopoli in the Achaean League is not something that would not be paid attention to by Cleomenes, because he tried to expand to all the cities in the Peloponnese, and the Achaean League adopted some measures of Cleomenes. And in Viotia, for example, they tried to give more power to all the citizens, and there were a negative reaction from the man of Megalopolis. There are few places and few people that are as interesting as Kirkiros the Megalopolitis, who was a politician and played a very important role by persuading the king of the Macedon that it was of his interest to support the Achaean League. And in the battle, he was the reformer of the Megalopoli. In 235, he gave up his power. And Kirkiros was very known for his simple way of living, his philanthropism, and his ideas about social equality and equal distribution of wealth. He judges being rich, and he tells his fellow citizens that they should distribute the wealth to everybody. Which we can see in the work Δικαία Διανομή. And he points out the danger that there is in the city from the not equal distribution of wealth. Kirkiros was an excellent lawmaker, as Stephanos Byzantios would characterize him, and was the one that showed the greatness of Megalopoli. Ladies and gentlemen, if we accept the opinion of Jakob Burckhardt that specific personalities are the ones who make their era and take part in the historical events, then we should say that Aratos and Cleomenes played a very important role during an era where the Alexander the Great had acted, and now the ancient Rome had begun to shine. Both leaders made history, give to the Peloponnese one place important that had value, and the international theater gave the chance to reproduce the events that happened in the West and the East These events made the kings of Macedon and the Ptolemies of Egypt and also the Romans not to be uninterested. What would have happened, however, if the proposal of Cleomenes to the Achaean League we give them the domination would be accepted? If the connection of Sparta and the Achaean League would give a power to the world that would be able to achieve what Philip of Macedon or the great Alexander could not abolish, 1,000 and more years after, to a letter to Emmanuel II, the following words were written. The Peloponnese is to be the first. The speaker speaks again in ancient Greek. And after some years in 1450, Pontius of Vessalion, priest of the Roman Church, would speak to Constantine Palaiologos this. Again, the speaker is speaking in ancient Greek. Could he really be something important that would be in the position to change their history if Aratus would have not accepted the proposal of Cleomenes, and if all of Greeks would be one? Thank you for your attention.
Over 20 years in this panel, I have ever seen the panel went this good. I've never seen that. I've been 20 years in order. So we keep the tradition. And it's time for Meletis Meletopoulos to take the floor. So, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Minister, Mr. President of the Institute, ladies and gentlemen, you hear the greetings, or should I tell them again? No, I don't have a presentation. So, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Kanellopoulou for this really great conference. Greece, apart from Athens, need this kind of councils, and I will help you with any way possible to continue your work. Contribution is more important if we have new ideas and saying new things. I have chosen as my subject the political state of Spartan as a different perspective. I believe that history is evolving when we have new findings, new sources, and new monuments. When we are giving new interpretations in the already new ones. For example, from my search, apart from Navarin, I'm trying to search different sources, and I have a really completely new perspective that others probably are not agree to. Researching the Spartan political state, from the aspect of political sides, I think that it has changed. And I think that we should find the reality from the aspect of scientists. The stereotype from the ancient Sparta is a great deformation. When you talk about Sparta in an American and Chinese, an image of oligarchic and based on military regime is created. A regime that is probably equal to a fascist regime, but that has nothing to do with the reality. Some of the most prime example is Kirkiros. When I was a student in high school, people used to say that the poor babies that were thrown off Kirkiros, Agesilas was unable to walk. This issue was resolved by a really great historian, Nikolaos Nurchalias. I think that we could be friends, who make his postdoctorate in Yanina. And he found bodies and he found bones in Kirkiros, but none of them belonged to any baby. This was a myth which was created from Spartans, maybe to terrify their enemies, or probably is a historical reform. But archaeologists should realize that this is a myth, and Kirkiros has nothing to do with throwing babies, but it was mainly an execution form. A second deformation would be that Sparta is not a land that loved wars. Spartans was 10,000 or 8,000, and it was not likely to and try to avoid war and evolutions general. A third myth would be the lack of civilization on the part of Sparta, in comparison with Athens, that their philosophy and democracy was born. Sparta was the center of civilization, of music contests and art in general. However, there is also the deformation of the instability of Athens. Sparta, we could say, is a stable city where there isn't this constant research. On the other hand, I would like to get back to that. In Sparta, of course, a great civilization was born, but not in the way that we mean it today. And it's really a great subject that I will come later. Let's talk about Spartan regime. I think that Sparta was not an oligarchy. And it's proven by science, and also this state. Sparta was a complex regime and has never existed a similar regime that has different institutions according to Anglo-Saxon checks and balances. Like in the US, the Supreme Court, it's a system that permits avoiding the abuse of power. In Sparta, nothing like this happened due to the fact that the regime was stable. The Council of the Elders, with 28 senators, and the 5 efforts, who are really powerful. And it's really important to note that the efforts was the only ones that didn't rise up before the king, and was the only ones. They were really powerful body. They were elected by appella. The kings was too, and it's an initiative for the whole world. The king doesn't make his son or his relatives in general a king. It's the first institution where we could find 2 monarchs, and it's really a universal initiative. Two kings were coexisting. It's a really difficult regime, but nevertheless, in Sparta, this regime existed. And now I'm going to talk about appella. The word appella is European word, came from appelleto, which means there different theories exist. Mrs. Kucha has researched them, all of them. The ancient Sparta locations. Appella is called above the incertitude of the fact that Athens has become really strong, and King Archidamus states that the civils were a disaster, and Sparta, if were the voting is becoming loudly. I would like to add something here. A really famous subject in America is the trap of Thucydides. What exactly is that? Is the fact that Sparta starts a precaution war before Athens become powerful. And of course, Sparta didn't want to become a less powerful state. It's like we can compare it with the relationship between China and US today. The thought was, like today, that if China become a really strong regime, America would not be able to resist it. Now I would like to continue the subject that I was talking before. So, what exactly does it mean that Appella not only rejects the proposal of but but proposes to continue the war? There is this institutional network that the last word is up to Spartan civils. And for me, it's a regime more stable than Athens. Sparta won in the long term. Many regimes that lasted before up to 700 years. There were many reforms and other, and the regime changed, but never existed a great catastrophe of it. Whereas in Athens, the regime changed over 15 years. We have some revolutions of the civils that were violent. Now in the digs that has happened in Archon's institution found that political institutions and revolutions were violent, and especially in Athens. In Athens, the regime was violence towards the minorities, and that we could find with evictions. Party was stable, which is a really important and great achievement. So, what was succeeded with the policy of the ancient Sparta? The answer is a really important and stable regime. She lasted in the war, she won Athens. But in reality, what is remained from Sparta? I have proposed to Mr. Megalopolitis to write a book, Sparta After Sparta, and I found him the title, like what happened afterwards, which is completely unknown. And that was the end of Sparta. That actually remains from Sparta is a model of a person. I think that both the lawmakers of Sparta set the base. For example, Kirkiros said that the egg will cost, for example, 10,000 euros. When people said where we could find 10,000 euros, we will not be able to find 10,000 euros, I will not eat eggs. The answer was, then don't eat. It was a process where civils learn to deny all the materials. People, when they come to Athens, they ask to see Agesilas the Great and important king Agesilas. And there, some Greeks were sitting and playing Amades, a Greek game that was also played by Kolokotronis. and one of them, and they were all surprised that this man has won so many battles, just an ordinary man wearing ordinary clothes. It was men fearless when it comes to face and support freedom. After the Battle of Chaeronea, Philippos sent a message that if I came to Sparta, I would destroy you. And Spartans was kind of indifferent. This kind of indifference from the part of Spartans and generally the Greeks is really characteristic. I would like to make a reference, but in this case we have a disagreement with Stathis Apostolidis. I think that
Με αυτά και με αυτά θα ξεφύγουμε πολύ και με αυτά κερδίσαμε 7 ολόκληρα λεπτά για ένα διάλειμμα. Γι' αυτό το λέω. Είναι σημαντικό να γίνει ένα διάλειμμα τώρα για να έρθουμε πιο φρέσκοι μετά, να πάμε κάπου μόνοι μας κλπ. Λοιπόν, τα λέμε σε 7 λεπτά από τώρα. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ όλους τους ομιλητές για την εξαιρετική πειθαρχία που κατέδειξαν.